Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
As old structures increasingly fail, where can we find reliable guidance? Could it be that ancient forms such as Druidry hold some answers to the problems of today? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to explore the hidden mysteries of Druids is Evert Hopman. Ellen is the author of Celtic Druidry, Rituals, Techniques, and Magical Practices. She's an herbalist, author, and druid who lives in an oak forest in western Massachusetts. Her volumes are far-reaching, including Celtic Herbals, a trilogy of druid novels, and children's literature. Her website, EllenEvertHopman.com. Ellen, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
This is a lovely topic, and it's one that I don't know a whole bunch about, so it's going to be very educational for me here. Your bio says you're a druid. What does that mean exactly?
Well, if you ask 3 druids, you'll get 10 different answers, but I can only answer that from my own perspective, and I'm what's called a Celtic Reconstructionist Druid. What that means is that we scour the ancient literature and we look at the old tribal laws. We study the history, we study the linguistics, we study the archaeology, and we're just very interested in what people were doing thousands of years ago when all of Europe, from the west coast of France all the way to Russia, was oak forest. And we were oak dwellers, and we lived, in harmony with nature in tribal groups, which is very similar to the way Native Americans live, for example. And we feel like we can learn a lot by looking backwards.
Well, I hope so, because looking forwards hasn't been helping lately.
It's a little depressing looking forwards. Yes, so.
Yeah, we're going to have to change our future a little bit here.
Yeah.
I understand that, I could be wrong here, but Druids, they didn't write down anything. They didn't leave a written history, did they?
They had an oral culture.
That's what I thought. Mm-hmm.
But the nice thing is, or it's kind of a mixed bag, but when the missionaries came, the Christian missionaries, they started writing stuff down. So we have, for example, the tribal laws, the Brehon laws, which is the equivalent of about 25 volumes of literature. We also have wisdom stories, ancient wisdom tales. We have 2,000-year-old poetry. We have a lot, actually, that was written down by Christian monks. And the Druids did, and the Celts did write things down. They just didn't write down things that they considered important. Because those things were too sacred to be written down. So they were passed down orally, so that, for example, if you were a druid, you were trained by other druids, and it sort of kept the franchise,
If the clergy, the Christians, were the ones that wrote it down, how much do you think it was colored and altered as a result of the two very different cultures?
Well, that's a problem. I mean, this is an ongoing, it's fascinating to me. It's an ongoing effort. We're always trying to tease out what is the old material and what has been altered, the subtle glosses. Sometimes it's really obvious, there's a nice story about a god and a goddess, and somebody turns into a deer or something like that. And then at the very end, it says something like, but so-and-so went to hell. So like, it's kind of, sometimes you can pick it out very clearly what was added. But sometimes it's difficult.
And there was things probably removed as well, you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. So it's quite a work in process, it sounds like.
It's an ongoing work in progress. It'll keep scholars going for generations, I'm sure, if we're still around.
What drew you personally to it?
Well, I was born in Austria, and when I was very small, my mother was always talking about the Celts because she was very interested in archaeology, and there were a lot of digs going on. She was an artist, and at the time there were graveyards, Celtic graveyards, being excavated, and they were finding jewelry and metalwork and things like that. And my mother was just fascinated. And what I remember most was the respect that she had. She just always talked. I could always feel the respect. I didn't know who the Celts were. I just knew that this was something that you were supposed to have a lot of respect for. That's all I knew. And then I promptly forgot about it and didn't think about it again until I was living in the States and I was in my 30s. And I heard Celtic music for the first time. And I heard somebody say, oh, this is Celtic music. And of course, the Celtic music that we have now is not the Celtic music from then, but the word Celt came up and, my little inner knower picked up. And I also spent some time in Scotland. I spent an entire summer at Findhorn, which is it's actually the oldest New Age community in the world. It's in Scotland. And while I was there, I got to spend a week on the island of Iona, which was originally a sacred island of the Druids before St. Columba got there and missionized Scotland from Iona. But before that, it was a holy island for the Druids. And that was where I think I first heard the word Druid spoken out loud. And again,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it resonated. As soon as I heard that word, it just resonated,
So are all Celts Druids or are all Druids Celts?
All Celts are not Druids. And all Druids today are not Celts, but 2,000 years ago they were.
And I understand that the Celtic people, now we think of Celts as Ireland and Scotland, but wasn't it all across Europe at one point?
Yeah, that's a misunderstanding. Most people think that Celtic means Irish or Scottish, and somebody with a kilt and probably red hair.
Now, careful.
Yeah. Well, the red hair actually comes from the Vikings. And
Interesting.
And the old Celts probably had brown hair and dark eyes. So it's very different. But yeah, the Celtic culture, it's a culture. It's not a race. It's not based on DNA, because you had everything from Gaul, which is what we call France today, parts of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Black Sea area, all the way down into Turkey was Celtic.
So where are most of the records found that you've been working with?
Well, we study the literature. My group, Tribe of the Oak, we have an extensive bibliography that everybody has to read before they can even start their training. So we kind of scour the literature.
And does it come from different countries, or is there a kind of a central location where it was recorded?
Well, my group is very Irish oriented. However, in the books that people are expected to read, a lot of them are pan-Celtic. So I don't know if I should mention any books, but for example, Pagan Celtic Britain is one that I think of, and we have Celtic from the West, which is about Iberia. There were Hispanic Iberian Celts. Iberia was a Celtic country, or especially northern Iberia, northern Portugal and northern Spain, parts of northern Spain. And we read about all those things.
So we're getting close to out of time in this segment, but my question to you here is Druidism a religion?
Again, some people say it's just a philosophy, it's a way of life. And then others for example, for Celtic Reconstructionists like myself, it is our religion. And it is a polytheist religion, meaning that we have many gods and goddesses, which the nice thing about being a polytheist is that you also respect other people's gods and goddesses, and you have no reason not to. So that's something for the future. If people could have a little more polytheism, they might get along better.
Even a little more tolerance would be welcome, yes.
Right.
So in polytheism, while you have many gods and goddesses, is there still, like in Native American, they have a lot of different spirits, at least, that they work with, but they do have the one great spirit, the all. Is that the same with the Druids?
Well, okay. Again, a very tricky question. We are part of the Indo-European continuum. And Indo-European means it stretches from India all the way into Western Europe. And so if you look at Hinduism, Hinduism is kind of the eastern edge of the Indo-European religious landscape. And Celtic religion is the western edge. We have the same religion. So in the same way that Hinduism will talk about the Atma, or the great soul that's the origin of all things, that all gods, goddesses, and all creation emanate from the Atma, we would never give it, or I don't think they would ever say it's male or female, or...
Well, we're going to have to pick up on the Atma on the other side of a station break. Ellen and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are you interested in evolving with the times and becoming all you can be? Don't you wish there was one place to find the latest information to help guide you through the process? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio TV. Join me on my mission to find the latest evolutionary knowledge and tools. The guests on Mission Evolution are leading experts in a wide variety of divergent topics, including allopathic, holistic, and integrative medicine, epigenetics, enlightenment, quantum physics, meditative practices, environmental issues, spiritual evolution, trauma healing, and so much more. Mission Evolution Radio TV is aired worldwide through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, X-Zone TV Channel 32 on Simul TV. You can enjoy our archives of radio or TV shows with our compliments at www.missionevolution.org. Come see the amazing lineup of guests and topics. With more than 200 episodes to choose from, you're sure to find what you're looking for. Visit www.missionevolution.org. What did the Druids do anyway? With us this hour discussing the Druids is the author of Celtic Druidry, Rituals, Techniques, and Magical Practices, Evert Hopman. Ellen, we were just getting into the Atma. Would you mind continuing with that?
Okay, so I was talking about the Hindu model, which is the Atma, or the great oversoul, and all of creation, including deities, gods and goddesses, everything, spirits, humans, worlds, universes, it all comes out of that. And another word you could use for that is source.
Unified field.
Well, maybe. Yeah, it's all one. It's all one, ultimately. Everything is sacred. Every plant, every tree, every rock, it's all divine. It's all sacred. So again, I'm only speaking for myself, because if you ask, as I said, ask 3 Druids, you'll get 10 different answers. But we even have Christo Druids. They follow Jesus, and they consider themselves polytheistic Druids, which I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. But yeah, so that's the model that I follow. I feel like there's a source which is unknowable at this time. And I wouldn't give it a name, but out of that emanates everything, including all the gods and goddesses and all of creation, and it's all sacred.
So it's the gods and goddesses are divinations of the all. So it starts to express different portions. Is that what we're looking at there?
I would say emanations
Okay.
of source. They come from source, whatever that is. You can't give it a name because it's too vast. I mean, the human brain is not capable of holding the universes. I mean, all the universes are so big and we are so small. And so whatever the origin of all that is unnameable and unknowable.
My human brain can't even hold a grocery list for any length of time, so
Exactly. I
it's
mean,
certainly understandable. So when did the Druids originate?
that is another problem. If you talk to English or British Druids, they feel that there's a continuous movement from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic to the Celtic to the modern Druids. They see it as a continuum. Again, for Celtic Reconstructionists, we don't see it that way. We see it as emerging from Celtic culture. And Celtic culture is not Neolithic. It's not Paleolithic. It's not Scandinavian. It's not Latin. it's its own thing. And the heyday was roughly 500 BC to 500 AD. That was the heyday, as far as we're concerned. But again, if you ask another Druid, they'll tell you something else.
So does the oral tradition continue today? I mean, was there a break in the oral tradition, or does it continue today?
There is no unbroken tradition. That's why we work so hard to read the books, to study the languages, to study the archaeology, because we're trying very hard to understand what we lost.
What is it about the Druidry that has you so engaged that you're going through all this reconstruction?
Well, I've been at it for about 40 years now. I've never lost interest. It's just always been there. And I explained how when I was very young, my mother was interested in the Celts. So on a very basic level, it's part of me. It's who I am. But I just find it endlessly satisfying. Again, it's very similar to Native American traditions. Women were highly respected. It wasn't a perfectly egalitarian society, but we know from the laws that women could inherit. They had the rights of divorce. You know, these are things that we lost when the missionaries came in. And we're still trying to recover from that. We looked at everything that in nature, whether it was a tree or a dandelion or a rock or a stream or a fire or a cloud. It was all sacred. A mountain, a valley. I mean, there were spirits of all these things, and they were all sacred. They all had the divine, whatever it is, essence within them. So the nice thing is I can go outside any day of the year. I don't have to go to a church. I can just step outside, especially if I'm hanging out with a tree. But I can just take one step outside and I'm in church.
That's a beautiful concept.
Yeah.
Can you please describe what a Druid was and did in ancient times, as much as you've been able to reconstruct?
Well, the Druids were a class within Celtic society. So exactly as in Hinduism, again, you have the Brahmins, who are a class, and then you have the warriors of the Kshatriya, and then you have the farmers and producers, and then you have the Sudra, who are the untouchables. In Celtic culture, you had the Druids, who were Nemed, which was a sacred class. Then you had the warriors, then you had the farmers and producers, and then you had the slaves. But it wasn't the way we think of it today. It wasn't a frozen caste system, and it wasn't frozen in India either. And in India, it only got frozen because of the Muslim invasions. When the Muslims came in and started invading, the whole culture got ossified. You know, that's what happens when people get attacked they get much more conservative and they freeze, you know. So that's what happened in India in the 9th century. Before that, the more learning that you had, you could go up the social ladder. And if you behaved badly, you would go down the social ladder. Well, the same thing with the Celts. The more learning you had, you would move up the ladder. And if you behaved terribly, you could be kicked out of your group and find yourself tending pigs at a pigsty, you know. Like,
but in a sacred way.
Well, yes, everybody was, every sacred human being was sacred, yes, but you had different rights and privileges depending on your class.
But the class depended upon your behavior, not necessarily birth.
It was both, actually, in ancient times, because if you were a Druid, if you were born to Druid parents, you would have been trained by your parents, and you would have been trained as a Druid. And the Druids were part of, it's called Nemed, the sacred class, which is the equivalent of the Brahmins. And kings and queens actually came from the warrior class, and they had to be ritually elevated to the sacred class by a Druid.
Now, we speak of Druids. Were they like priests or monks, or, you know, was there a certain...
Okay, they weren't monks. They weren't celibate. And in fact, the very early Christian communities, people were married and had children. That only changed when Roman Christianity came in. But Druids were specialists. They were called the Esdana, or the people of arts. And we actually have a term that's very similar to that today. We call it a master of arts. We have that. But they were called the people of arts. And so they were highly trained. And some of them were judges. Some of them were lawyers. Some of them were doctors. Some of them were herbalists. Some were magicians. A doctor and herbalist would have been the same thing. But some of them were magicians, sacred singers. Some of them were ritualists. I mean, every Druid probably knew a little bit about everything, but there were specialists because they spent 20 years in training to do a particular tribal function. And
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and the idea that a Druid was some old guy with a beard who was living as a hermit by himself out in the woods, that is a Victorian idea. That has nothing to do with what a Druid was. To be a Druid was to do a service, a function for the tribe. So you were the teacher of the children of the nobility, and you had a specialty. And some of them were musicians. They were harpers, for example. If you learned the harp, you automatically became part of the Nemed sacred class.
Beautiful. So we're about out of time in this segment, but let's talk about the rituals, and we can probably carry it over into the next segment. But you mentioned rituals. What kind of rituals did they perform, and how are they used today?
Okay, well, again, they did not write down the important things. And one of the things they did not write down, unfortunately, was the rituals. And so if you're trying to rely on Julius Caesar or missionary monks to tell you what Druid rituals were like, I would take it with a giant grain of salt, because they were trying to make the Druids look bad as they could. And personally, myself, when I think about a rural agricultural society where every person was incredibly needed and valuable, when you had to work really hard for basic things, I can't imagine people sacrificing other people right and left, you know. But those are some, like Julius Caesar talked about the Wicker Man, for example, and he said we were burning people and animals, and I have a hard time with that one. I suspect that is propaganda. We have no evidence that it really happened, but it has certainly grabbed the popular imagination. The only ritual that we actually have an account of is the gathering of the mistletoe rite.
Well, we're going to have to gather the mistletoe on the other side of another station break. Ellen and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you have a product or service you'd like to promote to a worldwide audience? Imagine your product featured on Mission Evolution Radio TV. If you're interested in showcasing your work, Mission Evolution is broadcast to the X-Zone TV Channel 32 Simul TV, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, and many other audio and social media platforms. Our professional studios can produce and broadcast your custom high-quality ad. It will be permanently embedded in each episode and featured in the archives for years to come. Together, we can make it happen. Contact us at info@missionevolution.org for more details. Spaces are limited, so don't miss out on this great opportunity. Email info@missionevolution.org today. What possible use could Druidism have today? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing ancient practices is Ellen Evert Hopman. Her website, elleneverthopman.com. Ellen, we were talking about the sad truth that a lot of the Druid rituals, or most of them, have kind of been lost to time. But you brought up the mistletoe. Explain what that is.
Well, Pliny the Elder, or Pliny the Elder, wrote about this, and it's the only account of an actual Druid ritual that we have from ancient times. And in that ritual, the Druids are dressed in white, which seems to be unusual. Druids wore plaid, or they wore feathered capes, which is a shamanic costume. But for the mistletoe rite, they did wear white. And I think it was in honor of the white berries of the mistletoe. And one Druid would climb up a tree, and this only happened when they found mistletoe growing on an oak. It had to be growing on an oak, because mistletoe will grow on apple trees. It grows on poplars, but only if they found it on an oak. And one Druid would climb up with a golden sickle, which couldn't have been gold because that's too soft, so it must have been bronze, or possibly some other metal with a gold coating, but probably bronze. On the sixth night of the moon, which means the sixth night after the first appearance of the moon, and they would cut down with the golden sickle, they would cut the mistletoe. Another Druid dressed in white would be waiting under the tree with a white cloth, and they would hold the cloth, and the mistletoe would drop onto the cloth. It was not allowed to touch the ground because it was too sacred. And mistletoe is an incredible medicinal herb, and this is the Viscum album, which grows in Europe. It doesn't grow here in the States, so please don't try it with American mistletoe. American mistletoe is poisonous, but this European mistletoe it's actually anti-tumor, anti-cancer, and I think the Druids knew that because it was cause for celebration when they found it growing on oak. And when you have mistletoe that grows on oak, that has the most potent anti-tumor activity, which is amazing. And then they would sacrifice 2 white oxen. Now, and that was in thanks, okay? So again, this is not some lurid thing where you're killing animals. I mean, remember that everybody lived on a farm, and if you wanted to eat meat, you had to kill the animal. We're used to walking down to the Stop and Shop and picking up something wrapped in plastic and bringing it home. They didn't do that. If they wanted a chicken, they had to go get a chicken, right? So they would sacrifice the oxen, and they would cook the meat, and some of it would be offered to the fire, because things that you put into fire rise. They go up to the heavens. So that if you want to make a gift to the gods and goddesses, you put it in fire. If you want to make a gift to the ancestors and the fairies who are underground, you pour liquid on the ground, or you leave offerings in a hole in the earth, or you leave offerings on the ground. So it depends on who you're addressing. But this was a way of saying thank you. And then the people would eat the meat. They would have a feast, you know? So that's the only one we have record of.
Only one you have. It sounds pretty shamanic in nature. Is how do Druids relate to shamanism?
Well, I talk about that in the book, but we have actual shamanic practices that we know of, and I did write some of them down, but different kinds of meditations. For example, there's one where you're fasting and you go into a dark room and you can put a cloth around your head so you have no light, or a piece of leather over yourself so there's no light. You're in the dark with a huge stone on your belly, and you lie there fasting until a poem comes out. And that's called the stone on the belly meditation. And we have other ones. There's one where you sit in a giant cauldron outside of a graveyard and you call until a spirit comes to you. There's another really old one that we have. If they wanted to find out who the next king or queen was supposed to be, they would, again, sacrifice an ox or a cow, something like that. They would turn the hide inside out. It had to be a freshly killed beast. You turn the hide inside out, which makes it's almost like a womb. And they would sew the druid inside of that and leave them there until they had the vision of who was supposed to be the next king.
Well, you'd be highly motivated to have your vision, wouldn't you?
Well, what I find most significant about all of these as I look at them, they're actually very feminine if you think about it. The stone on the belly meditation, if you're lying there on the ground with a big stone on your belly, that's a lot like being pregnant with a baby, on your belly, and you're sitting there. And then if you're being sewn into a bag, of a leather bag, that's a lot like going back to the womb. And then you emerge from that. These are very female, feminine kind of images, even.
So were the Druids then, was one caste of them or one specialty divination and seeing the future?
Absolutely.
I wondered. And was it a pretty large one? I mean, a large portion of what they did.
Yes. And again, they had different specialties, but for example, bird augury is one. You see which bird is flying over, and based on what bird it is, that gives you a reading. There's another one where you get up before dawn and you stand in the doorway with one hand on the right jam, the other hand on the left jam. I think that's what they're called, the two sides of the door. And the first animal or person that walks by gives you your reading.
So you're working with the betwixt and between, and that's really very common in Celtic shamanism. I wonder how closely they're related.
Well, that is Celtic shamanism. I mean, the Druids were, we know that they wore leather capes with feathers, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a very typical shamanic costume.
It's amazing how much the shamanic practices across the world are so similar in certain ways, isn't it?
Well, yes. And I do want to say something, which is that some Americans get embarrassed. They don't want to use the word shaman because they say that's cultural appropriation because shamanism comes from Siberia. But I actually met a Siberian, she was Mongolian. Sorry. I met a Mongolian shaman one time. She was the real deal, from Mongolia, trained shaman, and I told her, I said, Americans don't want to use that word because of cultural appropriation. So what word should we use? And she said, use the word shaman. She said the word shaman means awakening person.
Oh, how appropriate is that?
She said, feel free to use it.
So personally, how does being a Druid affect your daily life?
Well, as I said, I can just step outside. Like if I go outside to the mailbox, for example, I'm already in sacred space. That's what I love about it. It's like every plant that I see, every bird that I see, every tree that I see, they're all sacred. I'm in sacred space everywhere I go.
That sacredness, how does it change you? How does it change your life when you're walking and living in that sacredness? What differences do you see?
Well, I've been at it for 40 years now, so it's kind of hard to tell, but I can't imagine living without it. Let's put it that way. If I'm kind of the opposite of a modern human. If I'm in a city, I feel very walled off. I feel bereft. I feel lonely. I feel cut off from life. I don't get energy from cement, and the noise is very hard on me. But if I'm in the middle of nowhere, if I'm in the middle of the woods or by the ocean or in a field somewhere, I feel like I'm surrounded by life, by friendship, by love, by affection, by energy. That's just how I feel.
It sounds very appealing. We're about out of time in this segment, but real quick, does Druidry have a centralized authority or dogma?
No. We do not have a pope. We like to say we don't have a holy book. We have libraries. We have holy libraries. There's lots of books now. If you just Google Druid books or go on Amazon and put in Druid books or Druids or what, lots of books come up. So we have sacred libraries.
And that's interesting, given that they didn't record anything. How can you tell if you have an authentic text, that you can rely on the information?
Well, this is where training comes in. The people in my group, Tribe of the Oak, they spend at least 3 years, that's minimum, studying, and it's much more than that, maybe 5-7 years, just to get to know who the reliable authors are, the people that have real depth, who've really studied the material. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, it does. It really, really does. So we're going to have to go into another station break. And please stay with us as Ellen and I continue to explore Druidism and magic. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are you interested in evolving with the times and becoming all you can be? Don't you wish there was one place to find the latest information to help guide you through the process? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio TV. Join me on my mission to find the latest evolutionary knowledge and tools. The guests on Mission Evolution are leading experts in a wide variety of divergent topics, including allopathic, holistic, and integrative medicine, epigenetics, enlightenment, quantum physics, meditative practices, environmental issues, spiritual evolution, trauma healing, and so much more. Mission Evolution Radio TV is aired worldwide through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, X-Zone TV Channel 32 on Simul TV. You can enjoy our archives of radio or TV shows with our compliments at www.missionevolution.org. Come see the amazing lineup of guests and topics. With more than 200 episodes to choose from, you're sure to find what you're looking for. Visit www.missionevolution.org. Magic? Superstition? Dogma? What is Druidism anyway? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Ellen Evert Hopman. Her website, elleneverthopman.com. Ellen, we've spoken of Druidism, and we have linked the word magic with it. How does magic apply to Druids? And what is magic that applies to Druids, for that matter?
Well, among Druids, there's less of a focus on magic, usually more of a focus on giving thanks and giving praise. That's what we do when we gather for rituals. But magic is something that I'm still trying to understand. It's a big, deep topic. And the way I understand it now is on the quantum level. That's the way I understand it. That, as you know, the universe is just a wave of possibilities. And when you focus using symbols, this is why people use wands, and they use magical stones, and they use colors, and they use candles, and all these symbols are just designed to focus the mind and focus your awareness. And once you do that, then you can affect change on the quantum level.
And so affecting change on the quantum level is what you consider magic?
That's what I now understand it as. I've always understood that the magical herbs, magical scents, magical colors, I've always understood those as symbols to focus the mind. But more and more, I'm now thinking about the quantum level. Like, how does this work? Why would it work? So imagine if you do magic yourself, that means you're using these different symbols. It might be a stone, whatever it is that you think is magical, but you're using it to stop all the chatter, and you're focusing your thoughts. Imagine if you have a whole group of, say, 12 people, all focused on the same symbols. I think what's happening is it's causing change on the quantum level. That's the only way I can understand it.
Well, it does make sense when you put it that way. The world seems to be in crisis on every front. How do you see Druidry as being able to help with this?
Well, the Druids were the advisors to the nobility and to the rulers. Of course, we can't do that these days. Although I have to admit that I do write letters to the president and whoever's in power. I do tend to write letters. But the idea of being politically active is very Druidic. We did that for thousands of years. But Druids, oh boy, this is a big topic. But if you study the Brehon laws, the tribal laws, Brehon, Brehon laws, you'll see that it's all about restorative justice. And they were meticulous about it. So they had all these precedents, like if somebody's chicken gets into somebody's herb garden and scratches it up, what do they owe the person who has the garden that's now been ruined? Or if the sheep gets into somebody's woad patch and shears off the woad, eats it down to the nub, then what do you owe the person who lost their woad? And the judgment is a shearing for a shearing. So if a sheep shears the woad, then you owe the one shearing from the sheep to the person who has the woad. But I mean, it's like that. It's very meticulous. But it's always about restorative justice. About
restorative as in bringing back balance?
Yes. So for example, wounds. If somebody's wounded, if there's enough blood to fill half of a hazelnut, what's the penalty? What if there's enough blood to fill half of an eggshell? What is the penalty? And it goes on like that. And it's always about trying to heal the community. In our culture now, if you do pay a penalty, you often pay it to the government or to your city or whatever, But in those days, they wanted to identify who was hurt, who was wounded, and then the person who did the damage. And it wasn't just the person. It was their entire 4-generation family. The Dara.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, because they didn't really think of themselves as individuals. They thought of themselves as members of a clan, which was 4 generations.
Good heavens.
So the whole family was responsible.
So you're highly motivated to walk the straight and narrow, or you're going to drag your family down with you.
Exactly.
Interesting. Can you talk about the connection between humans and nature from a Druid point of view?
Well, we're just a part of nature. We're just we're sacred, just like any aspect of nature, but we're just one more part of it.
But we seem to have separated ourselves from that. We see ourselves as other. Do you see that as taking us out of the natural order?
Yes, absolutely. And that happened about 2,000 years ago when the missionaries showed up and said that we were supposed to control nature, which is, that's totally nuts.
Well, who's the larger in that little equation, right?
Yeah, I mean, we never looked at it that way. That's not the way we look at it.
We being the Druids, right?
Well, the way tribal people, any indigenous group of people, it doesn't have to be Druids, but if you look at any indigenous culture, they see themselves as a part of something greater. You have the deer, you have the bears, you have the people. Everybody has a place, and you live on the land and you don't trash it. That's another thing. I mean, the Brehon laws talk about not hurting animals, not hurting children. This is why I have a really hard time believing that Druids were going around sacrificing people right and left. I mean, we know that there was human sacrifice. We do know that, but we don't know exactly why. Like, some people say it's because they were political prisoners or prisoners of war. And some people say it's because Druids chose to sacrifice themselves as a gift to the gods to save the community. So,
well, it's that time in the show, Ellen, when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
My mission.
Your mission. What's your mission, Ellen?
Well, I guess looking back on my entire life, because I've been at this for a while, it's always been about trying to get back to the indigenous values and qualities that we had I'm Western European, that's who I am, but what our beliefs were before everything got changed.
Before we got all separated and whatnot, right?
Right. And I try to bring it forward. I do that in my books. I do it in my teaching. I do it in my speaking. I try to take the old ways that were developed over thousands of years. People had to live in community. They had to figure this out. So, and bring that forward for today.
That's a beautiful mission. We could certainly use some of that. How do you see our world changing if more people embrace the Druid way of life?
Wow. Well, if we had respect, it comes down to respect. If we had respect for the animals, for the plants, for the trees, for the water, for the air, for the fire, we wouldn't be in the pickle that we're in right now.
If we had respect for each other even, right?
And for each other, yes. Yes.
So what ancient wisdom from the Celts do you think are the most relevant to modern life?
Respect. The respect part.
The respect piece.
I mean, the Celts, they weren't pacifists by any means, and they certainly stole each other's cows, and but there was no concept of genocide. Nobody went around slaughtering huge numbers of people. It just wasn't like that. You stole cows because you wanted to feed your tribe, and then they came and stole them back,
Or took your sheep, right?
Or took your sheep in return or whatever. Yeah, that went on, definitely. But warriors were much more concerned about having good hair, beautiful clothes, nice jewelry, a gorgeous horse. It was all about presentation. That was much more important than slaughtering vast numbers of people.
Well, here we are, 2024, And we're probably more separate and isolated and hurting
Mhm.
than at any other time in history. Do you feel that this, if we could start taking on some of these principles, it could start to mend that?
Well, I think dropping the cell phones would be a start. It's ironic. I mean, we're very connected through the internet and all that, but the more connected people are, the more lonely they feel. And it's especially true for teenagers. It's really bad for teenagers. And I happen to feel that kids should not have a smartphone until they're at least 18. That's how I feel. And so that they have a chance to develop friendships and work with each other and, work it out, playground politics and real life, activities. Because it's just driving people nuts. It
It is.
really is.
Well, Ellen, unfortunately, we are out of time in the show, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Our guest this hour has been the author of Celtic Druidry, Rituals, Techniques, and Magical Practices, Ellen Evert Hopman. To find out more about Ellen, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, elleneverthopman.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.